I listened to his voicemail 4 times in a row, and I didn't feel what I was supposed to feel. Not grief. Not panic. Not even relief. Just stillness. And that's the part one keep coming back to. Not what he said. Not even him. But what didn't happen inside me when I heard his voice again after so many years? Because I thought something would break. I thought I would finally feel it properly, like a wave or something. But nothing really came. And I still don't know what that says about me. That voicemail has been sitting on an old phone I keep in a shoebox in my closet for 11 years. I don't even know why I still have the phone. It doesn't work. It doesn't connect to anything. It only exists for that one message. I charged it last spring. I don't remember deciding to do it. I just found myself doing it, like my body already knew the sequence before my mind caught up. When it turned on, I just stared at the screen for a long time, thinking maybe it wouldn't be there anymore. Like time might have finally erased it for me. But it hadn't. His name was still there. I went into the bathroom without really thinking about it. I don't know why the bathroom. It just felt like the only place where I could be alone with it, even though I already was alone. And I sat on the floor and I played it. Once. Then again. Then again. 4 times total. And I didn't cry. That's the part that bothers me the most. Not the voicemail itself. Not even him. It's the fact that I didn't cry, or shake, or feel anything dramatic enough to explain the years that passed between then and now. I keep wondering what that means. Whether it means I've made peace with it, or whether I've just gotten better at not feeling things when I should. I want to say it's peace. That sounds better. Cleaner. Easier to explain. But I don't think it is. I've tried to tell this story out loud before. Not fully. Never fully. Maybe 6 times. Maybe more. And every time, I stop at the same point. Because the beginning is easy. The beginning makes sense. The beginning doesn't make me look like someone I don't recognize. It's the middle that I can't get through without feeling something shift in me. Because that's where the choice was. That's where I didn't do what I should have done. And I keep trying to explain it in a way that makes it sound reasonable. Like there was logic to it. Like I was just being careful. Respectful. Thoughtful, even. And maybe that's part of the truth. But not all of it. The truth is I knew something was wrong. I just didn't act on it. And that difference matters more than I want it to. I moved to Columbus when I was 26. I had just gotten out of a relationship that had run longer than it should have. I had a new job, a new city, and I didn't know anyone there. Not a single person. At the time, that felt exciting. A clean slate. That's what I told myself. I found an apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building. The kind where everything makes noise. Radiators knocking all winter, pipes shifting in the walls, thin floors where you could hear your neighbor living their life without trying. 2 weeks after I moved in, there was a knock on my door. I opened it, and he was standing there holding a 6-pack like this was already something casual between us. Like we'd known each other longer than we had. He said, "I heard you moving in, and I figured you probably haven't found a grocery store yet." And I was right, because I can hear your stomach from my apartment. And I laughed. Not politely. Actually laughed. That was Daniel. And I need to be careful here, because every time I've ever tried to explain him, people build a version of him too fast. Good guy, bad guy, complicated guy. Everyone wants to decide immediately. But he wasn't that simple. He was 31. Quietly funny in a way that didn't always land immediately. Sometimes you only understood his jokes a few seconds too late, and then you'd laugh after the moment had already passed. He had a dog. A big Labrador. I'll get to the name, because it matters more than it should. He worked in logistics. He used to say, "I make sure things go from point A to point B, and I'm very good at it, and it is exactly as boring as it sounds." And the next morning, he made me coffee. I know what that sounds like. I know the story people start building from that. But that's not the part that matters. Because what started as neighbors turned into something else. Something we never really defined. Something that felt easy at first. And then, about 8 months in, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not in a way you could point to and say, "That's when it changed." It was quieter than that. But once it changed, I started noticing things I had missed before. Or maybe I hadn't missed them at all. Maybe I just didn't want to look at them too closely. And that's where everything actually begins to fall apart. It didn't happen all at once. That's the part that makes it hard to explain. If it had been obvious, if it had been sudden, I think I could have justified myself more easily. I could have said I didn't see it coming. But it wasn't like that. It was small things. Things that didn't feel like anything on their own. He would go quiet sometimes. Not the normal kind of quiet where someone is just tired or distracted. This was different. Like he wasn't fully in the room anymore, even when he was sitting right next to me. And I remember noticing it and immediately trying to explain it away. Work stress. Bad day. Just tired. Normal things. Because that's what you do when you don't want to ask a harder question. I asked him about it once. Just once. And he looked at me like I had interrupted something. Not angry. Not defensive. Just distant for a second. And then he said, "I'm fine." And changed the subject. So smoothly that I almost accepted it without thinking. Almost. But there was a pause after that I couldn't unsee once I noticed it. Like the conversation had shifted slightly off its axis and never quite came back. Still, I didn't push it. I told myself it wasn't my place. That's the sentence I keep returning to. It wasn't my place. It sounds responsible. Mature. Respectful. Like I was honoring something important about him. But looking back now, I don't think that's what it was. I think I was avoiding the responsibility of knowing what the answer would mean. Because once you know something isn't okay, you can't unknow it. And then you're involved. And I didn't want to be involved in something I didn't know how to fix. So I stayed where it was comfortable. On the surface of things. Where everything still looked fine if you didn't look too closely. We still laughed. We still spent time together. It still felt, from the outside, like something solid. And maybe that's what makes this harder than if it had just been bad. Because it wasn't bad. It was real. Which means I wasn't tricked. I participated. There were moments I remember now that feel heavier in hindsight than they did at the time. Like hearing him in his apartment through the wall one night. No TV. No music. Nothing. Just silence. Long stretches of it. And I remember standing there in my kitchen, listening without meaning to, thinking maybe I was imagining it. When I knocked, he opened the door almost immediately. Smiling. Normal. Like I had interrupted nothing. He said he'd been listening to a podcast with headphones. And I accepted it. Not because it made perfect sense, but because it made things easier. And I didn't want to challenge the easier version. That's something I understand differently now. Back then I thought I was being careful. Now I think I was being selective. Choosing which truths I was willing to hold. There's a difference between not knowing and not wanting to know. And I think I lived in that second space longer than I should have. Still, nothing felt dramatic enough to act on. Nothing felt like it required intervention. It was just off. Quietly off. And I kept telling myself that if something was really wrong, someone closer to him would notice. Someone more important. Someone who actually had the right to step in. Not me. That word again. Not me. As if closeness was something I could measure and use as permission. And I didn't realize then how easy it is to confuse distance with responsibility. Or how convenient it becomes when you don't want to be the one who has to decide. Because deciding means risk. And risk means consequences. So I stayed in the middle. Where nothing had to be decided yet. And that's where things stayed. Until the phone call. The one I almost didn't answer. The one that changed what I could pretend I didn't see. Because once it came through, I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was part of the conversation. Whether I wanted to be or not. And I didn't know it yet, but that was the point where everything started moving in a direction I couldn't stop anymore. I almost didn't pick up. It was one of those unknown numbers that should have just gone to voicemail. That's what I normally would have done. I usually let things like that pass without thinking. But I picked up anyway. And I still don't really know why. There was a pause on the other end before she spoke. Not a normal one. A deliberate one. Like she was trying to decide how to enter the conversation without breaking something. And then she said, "Hi, you don't know me. I'm Daniel's sister." And everything in me just tightened. Not dramatically. Not like in movies. More like something internal shifted and stage shifted. She didn't waste time. She said she needed to ask me something. That she needed me to be honest. And I remember thinking, even in that moment, that I hadn't done anything wrong yet. Not technically. Not in a way I could clearly point to. But something about the way she said it made me feel like I was already standing inside something I hadn't agreed to be part of. She asked me if he seemed okay. And that question, it sounds simple. But it didn't feel simple. Because I had to decide what version of okay she was asking about. And in that split second, I chose the easiest interpretation. I said yes. I said he seemed fine. I said we had seen each other recently, that he was in a good mood, that everything was normal. And even while I was saying it, I knew I was smoothing over the edges of what I had actually been seeing. Not lying outright. Not fully. Just reshaping it into something safer. She told me she hadn't been able to reach him properly in weeks. That something felt off. That she didn't know who else to call. And then she said something that stuck with me more than anything else. She said she had found my number in his phone once when he left it at her place. Like it had just been sitting there, waiting for a moment like this. And she had kept it. Just in case. That phrase again. Just in case. Like she had already been preparing for something I hadn't allowed myself to prepare for. And in that moment, I felt something I didn't fully understand yet. Not guilt. Not yet. More like awareness. A quiet recognition that she was paying attention in a way I hadn't been. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. Long enough that the silence in my apartment started to feel louder than the conversation had been. Gerald was there. He had started spending more time with me by then without it feeling unusual. Like it had just become part of the rhythm. He came over, put his head on my knee like he always did. And I remember scratching behind his ears without really feeling it. Because my mind was still stuck on the call. And I told myself she was going to talk to him directly now. That this was better. That this was how it was supposed to go. Family first. That made sense. Not me. Again that word. Not me. I built a whole internal explanation in the space of a few minutes. It wasn't my role. I didn't have the full picture. I didn't know his history. I was overstepping if I inserted myself. All of it sounded correct. Responsible. Calm. And I held on to that version of it like it was solid. But underneath it, something else was already forming. Because there was a difference between not knowing what to do and choosing not to find out. And I think I already knew which one I was doing. I just didn't want to name it. So I went on with my night. I made coffee even though I didn't want it. I turned on something on TV I didn't pay attention to. I tried to keep everything normal on the surface. And I actually slept that night. That's the part one still think about. I slept. Like nothing had shifted. Like I hadn't just been pulled into something I couldn't fully step out of anymore. And I remember thinking, even briefly, that maybe I was overthinking it. That maybe it was nothing. That maybe I had done the right thing by not making it bigger than it was. But that thought didn't last long. Because 2 weeks later, there was a knock at my door at 11:30 at night. And when I opened it, everything I had told myself started to feel a lot less stable than it had before. When I opened the door, he was standing there with Gerald. And I knew immediately something was wrong. Not in a dramatic, obvious way. There was no shouting, no chaos. It was something quieter. More contained. But still wrong in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. His face looked off. Like he had been holding himself together for too long and was only barely still doing it. And I could see it in his eyes first. That tired, distant look. Like he wasn't fully present in his own body. He wasn't crying in that moment, but I could tell he had been. There's a way people look after that. Like something has already been spent. He asked if Gerald could stay with me for the night. He said he had work to do, that he'd be up late, and Gerald wouldn't settle down. Even as he said it, I knew it didn't make sense. Daniel didn't work like that. Not suddenly. Not like this. It felt like a reason that had been built quickly, just to fill the space. But I didn't question it. I just said yes. Of course I did. I always said yes when things didn't fully make sense, as long as they were easy to accept. He handed me the leash, and then he didn't leave right away. He stood there in the doorway. Not moving. Not speaking. Just there. And I remember that moment so clearly because it felt like something was happening internally that I couldn't see. Like he was making a decision, but not out loud. And I didn't interrupt it. I just waited. That's what I did. I always waited. Then he said something I still don't fully know how to process. He said, "You're a good person, you know that?" And I remember laughing. Because it felt easier than answering. Easier than thinking about why he would say that at a moment like this. I said something like, "You're just saying that because I'm taking your dog." trying to make it light, normal, safe. And he laughed too. But it was short. Different from before. Like something didn't fully connect in it. And then he left. Just like that. And I closed the door. And that was the moment everything actually changed. Not later. Not after the fact. That moment. Because I knew, even as I stood there, that I should have said something else. Anything else. I should have asked him what was going on. I should have stopped him from leaving. I should have called someone. I should have done something that interrupted the direction he was heading in. But I didn't. I took Gerald inside. I gave him water. I sat down. And I told myself a story. That he needed space. That this wasn't my place. That I shouldn't push. That he would come back when he was ready. And the thing is, none of that sounded wrong to me at the time. It sounded reasonable. It sounded calm. It sounded like restraint. But looking back now, I can see what it really was. It was avoidance dressed up as care. And I didn't know that then. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to name it. I went to bed that night like everything was still normal. And he didn't knock on my door the next morning. At first, that didn't feel strange. I told myself he probably left early. That he didn't want to wake me. That everything was fine. I walked Gerald. I made coffee. I went to work. I came back. And slowly, the silence started to feel heavier. I knocked on his door that evening. No answer. And still, I didn't fully let myself think it through. Not yet. Because thinking it through would have meant accepting what I was starting to feel in my body already. That something had shifted in a way I couldn't reverse. And I wasn't ready for that. Not even close. So I told myself he was just busy. That he would show up. That this wasn't the moment where everything changed. Even though, deep down, I think I already knew it was. And I just kept waiting anyway. For something I didn't yet want to name. The next morning, I opened my door and she was standing in the hallway. And I don't think I've ever had a moment like that before or since. Where your brain understands something before your emotions catch up, but your body reacts anyway. Because I saw her face and I knew. Before she said anything. Before she asked anything. I just knew. She looked exhausted in a way that wasn't just physical. Like she had already gone through too many possibilities in her head and had landed on the one she didn't want. She said she had driven 4 hours. She had a key. And then she asked me one question. How long has he not been answering? And I said, since yesterday morning. And I watched her face change in real time. Not dramatically. Not like in movies. More like something inside her had just confirmed what it already feared. And I didn't move. I just stood there with Gerald's leash in my hand, suddenly aware of how tightly I was holding it, like that mattered at all. She opened the door. And I didn't follow her in. I stayed in the hallway. Because something in me already knew I wasn't supposed to see what came next in the same way she was going to see it. And I remember that waiting feeling. That suspended second where everything is still technically unresolved, but your body already knows the outcome. When she came back out, she wasn't crying. That's what I remember most clearly. She wasn't crying. She was just still. And she said he was okay. Physically okay. That part matters. I need to say that clearly because everything after this gets tangled easily, and I don't want to distort that. He was okay. He went with her. He got help. From everything I know now, he's okay. But the way she looked at me after that, that's the part one can't stop thinking about. Because it wasn't anger. It wasn't accusation. It was something quieter than both. Something like understanding that didn't comfort me at all. After that, things moved quickly in a way I wasn't fully part of. She didn't speak to me for about a week. And I understood that too. I really did. Because she had asked me something simple and I had given her something that turned out not to be true in the way it needed to be true. Even if I didn't intend it that way. Even if I told myself I was just being careful. When she finally called me, I picked up immediately. I had already rehearsed what I was going to say. Apology. Explanation. Responsibility. All of it arranged neatly in my head like I could control how it landed. But she didn't let me get through it. She said, "I need to understand why you said he was fine." And I tried. I really did. I talked about privacy. About not wanting to assume. About not overstepping. About how I thought it was better for her to speak to him directly. All the language I had built around the decision. And she listened. Completely. Without interrupting. And when I finished, she just said, "Okay." Not forgiveness. Not anger. Just acceptance that this was the explanation I had. And that was it. Then she paused. And said, "He asked about you." And I didn't know what to do with that sentence. Because it didn't fit anywhere I had prepared in my head. I asked what he said. And she hesitated for a long time. Then she said, "He said you were always kind to him." And I remember sitting with that in a way I didn't fully understand then. Because it sounded like something simple. But it didn't feel simple. It felt incomplete. Like I was missing the version of myself that existed in that sentence. Not wrong. Just not the whole picture. After that, he didn't come back into my life in any meaningful way. He came back for his things weeks later. I saw him briefly in the hallway. Maybe 4 minutes. He looked better. Not in a forced way. Not in a way I was imagining. Actually better. More present. More grounded. And that should have made everything easier. But it didn't. It made it harder in a different way. Because it forced me to realize that life had continued without my involvement in it. He hugged me. It was short. And he said, "Take care of yourself." And I said, "Okay." And then he left. And that was it. 6 months later, I heard from the building manager that he had officially given up the apartment. And that was when I cried. Not during any of it. Not when things were happening. Later. When it was already over. And I still don't fully understand why that was the moment it broke through. But it did. And it stayed. Even after everything else settled. Because that wasn't the end of the story for me. That was just the moment I started realizing I had been telling myself the wrong version of it the entire time. And once that starts, it doesn't really stop. I thought it was over after that. That's the strange part. I genuinely believed the story had already reached its ending. Not a clean one, not a satisfying one, but an ending all the same. And then, about 2 years later, I got an email from him. No warning. No build-up. Just his name sitting in my inbox like it had never stopped belonging there. I opened it immediately, and I remember the exact feeling in my chest when I saw it wasn't long. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't heavy. It was almost casual. It said, "I heard you moved. Hope the new place is good. I have a dog again. Her name is Patricia." That was it. Nothing else. No questions about what happened. No mention of anything between us. No explanation for why he was reaching out at all. Just that. And I read it over and over again, trying to find something hidden inside it. A tone. A meaning. A signal. Something that would tell me how I was supposed to respond. Because I drafted responses immediately. More than I can count. Long ones where I tried to say everything I had never said properly. Short ones where I tried to act normal, like none of it mattered. Careful ones. Apologetic ones. Neutral ones. I rewrote them again and again. And I never sent a single one. At first I told myself I was waiting. Waiting until I knew the right thing to say. But that wasn't really true. Because the longer I waited, the more something else started to happen. Fear. Not of him. Of what his response would do to the version of the story I had built over the years. Because if he responded normally, like nothing had happened, then I would have to face the possibility that I had been carrying something alone for a long time that he had already moved past. And if he didn't respond kindly, then I would have to face that too. Either way, I wasn't ready for the answer. So I didn't reply. And then time passed. And more time passed. And eventually it became harder to reply than not reply. And then it became impossible. And now it's been over 15 years. And I don't think about that email every day anymore. But I also don't forget it. There's a difference between those two things I didn't understand back then. Now I do. He probably has a life somewhere completely separate from all of this. Maybe he still has Patricia. Maybe there were other dogs after her. Maybe none of this takes up space in his mind the way it still takes up space in mine. That's something I've had to sit with. The imbalance of it. That I might be holding on to something that someone else already released. And I don't know what to do with that yet. I still have the voicemail. The one I mentioned at the beginning. It's not dramatic. There's no confession in it. No final words. Nothing that would justify why it stayed with me for so long. He just called about something normal. I think he was asking if I wanted to get food. And at the end, he said, "Anyway, call me back. Or don't. You know where I live. You know where I live." That line has followed me more than anything else. Because it was true. He was right there. Literally across the hall. 12 feet away. And I still didn't do what I should have done with that knowledge when it mattered. I kept it. Because part of me thought I deserved to keep hearing it. Like a reminder that proximity is not the same as action. That knowing where someone is doesn't mean you know what they need. And I don't know if keeping it is healing or punishment or something in between. I just know I haven't been able to delete it yet. And I've tried. More than once. But every time I think about it, I feel this strange resistance. Like I'm erasing something I haven't fully understood yet. There's something else too. The reason I'm saying all of this now. I have a daughter. She's 19. And she's in a situation with someone right now where she keeps saying the same things I used to say. That she doesn't want to overstep. That it's not really her place. That maybe they just need space. And I hear it, and it hits me in a way I can't ignore anymore. Because I recognize every word of it. And I don't know how to tell her what I know without telling her everything I've just told you. Without showing her the version of me I've spent a long time trying to make peace with. The version that stayed quiet when she shouldn't have. The version that told herself she was being careful when she was actually just afraid. And I don't know if she needs that version of me or if she deserves something cleaner. Something easier to look at. That's what I keep going back and forth on. Because I don't want her to learn the lesson the way I did. But I also don't know if I can protect her from it. Maybe I can only tell her what it looked like from here. From the other side of it. From the place where the choice is already made and all that's left is understanding it. And living with it. And I think that's what this really is. Not a story about him. Not even really a story about what happened. It's a story about the version of myself who thought she was doing the right thing, while slowly realizing she wasn't. And still not knowing what to do with that. Because there's no version of this where it resolves cleanly. No final moment where it stops hurting in a straight line. It just stays. In different forms. At different distances. Sometimes quieter. Sometimes louder. But still there. And I think the hardest part is not what happened. It's how easy it was to explain it to myself at the time. And how long it took me to realize that explanation wasn't the truth. It was just the version I could live with. And I've been living with it ever since.